Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? Today, we're going to celebrate what we know as Halloween. And in our world, we call it Samhain. And today is actually October 31st, and I'm recording this. So you will probably be getting this tomorrow. But Samhain is actually and the midpoint. And I know we talked a little bit about this last video, but Samhain is the midpoint of the holy day between the fall equinox and the winter solstice. And so the midpoint, if we actually work that out astrologically, does not fall necessarily on October 31st. And I know different ancient traditions and Celtic and Druidic traditions and earth medicine traditions have celebrated it usually around October 31st, November 1st, November 2nd. But in reality, if you go back to our ancient ancestors, it falls really depending on where that midpoint falls. And this year, the astrological midpoint would fall around November 7th, and then it goes all the way into the new moon. And the new moon is November 20th. November 20th is the new moon. So Samhain is not just one day, it's really a threshold. And it really, you can think of it this year as mostly all of November or the first few weeks of November, all the way from October 31st into November 20th into the new moon. And this is the time of in the solar year before the Gregorian calendar that we use, the 12 months. This was the time of the end of the year, celebrated as the last harvest and as the end of the year. And so the year, our solar year, really begins in the dark. It begins in gestation before the rebirth that you see, for example, in spring equinox. So, so we follow along with this cycle, which is the kind of the organic, natural cycle of the earth. We can see that this is a time, I mean, and it's obvious that we're going inward, that we are um, kind of moving in to commune with our essence, with our soul, with the primordial mother. And it's a time of what we call a time of darkness, a time of regeneration, a time of going inward, of time of where the veils are thinning, where it's easiest to connect with the liminal realms. And so when we talk about the feminine path, this this time of descent, this time of darkness, of regeneration, of transformation is really, really critical because this is the time that we connect with not just our own inner self, but that we connect with the mother, with the divine, with the oneness. And the feminine path, as this has come together, the synthesis is really a path of, it's a non-dual path, mystical path, but also relational path. And so let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. So as a non-dual path, it's a path of connecting and feeling and experiencing and being in union with oneness, with the divine, with the absolute. And that which I refer to as the great mother, the primordial essence that lives within each one of us. But at the same time, it's not the goal is not to dissolve and be in oneness. It's some of the other non-dual paths and wisdom traditions are about. The feminine path is very strongly relational, and it's very strongly about embodying that all the aspects of your divinity, and then allowing yourself to really honor the unique essence of what you're bringing through, your unique expression of that divinity, of the divine. And we each have our own medicine, for example, maybe similar to others in how we activate the medicine, because the medicine of connecting to the divine realm is the same. It's the same divine realm. It's the same primordial mother. It's the same unity consciousness. However, how we engage in that, how we activate that, how we bring it through, if it's with words, if it's with foods and cooking, if it's with, creative, building of other creations, writing, dancing, singing, and many other quiet ways that we might bring through and be that expression in the world. And so it's like the rainbow of various colors. We each have our own very unique expression of how we are bringing through the medicine, the divinity, the essence. And not only that, but in this feminine path and feminine medicine, it's also very important to relate and to honor the spirit and the realm, the liminal realm, but also in a way of relating to our ancestors, of relating to the spirits of the land, of the spirits of the elements, all the other ancestors that we have that aren't human, right? It's a relating to them. And so in that way, it becomes a relational, it's not just a very single, non-dual dissolving in that unity consciousness, but it's about accessing and anchoring in that essence within us that we all have, that all of creation carries this essence. It's in the blueprint, right? It's who we are. It's part of what everything is. And at the same time, it's like bringing that through and how we are expressing it. So from the oneness, from the absolute into the multiplicity, and then relating to the earth, relating to the waters, to the fires, to the wind and the air, and in the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, relational. And so each part of creation is singing their song, is bringing through their medicine. And the feminine path, as we're bringing this through as feminine medicine, is about connecting to that. Now, there are 5 pathways of how to tune in, which are based on the pathways that our ancient mothers use, the path that our ancient ancestral mothers used. And it's the path of it's rooted in the feminine mysteries, of course, but it's the path of the voice, using our voice and the sacred drumming. And it's the path of connecting with the wisdom of the lunar cycles. And it's also the shamanic feminine wisdom path, all the teachings of the earth medicine and the earth cycles, which I'm talking about right now, moving and navigating through the liminal fields and the liminal realms, and how to transform and how to activate the transformation in each one of us, the healing, how to like I said, how to navigate those liminal realms. It's all part of the shamanic mysteries. And then, of course, the womb mysteries, the womb medicine, which is really two separate areas that cover. One is the blood mysteries that are connected to the womb mysteries, right? The blood mysteries that women experience. And the other is the wombs, the energetic wombs that we carry, and how the womb is also a pathway, it's a portal into connecting not just with the mystery and primordial mother, the essence, but also how to connect that through our lineage and the collective lineage. So the ancestral healing and ancestral veneration is also connected to the shamanic wisdom. And there's also the pathway of the feminine mysteries themselves, which is bringing this all together and how to move through our personal individuated fields of our emotional field, our mental field, our soul field, if you may, and our divinity, how to connect, access those different dimensions, and then how to bring that out into the world, how to navigate our feminine soul and activate our feminine soul through the gateways, which we might also know as the chakras. And so this is all the different pathways of feminine medicine. And it's not new. Like I've said before many, many times, it's in our bones, it's in our being. This is what our ancestors did and practiced and were in tune with and worked with. And for many of us, we can feel it. We can feel it, either we recognize it when it's being spoken, when it's being embodied by someone, or we feel the lack of it. We feel the yearning for more of that in our spirituality, in our spiritual groups, in our mystical practices, or even our spiritual practices. We might be feeling as women that there's something missing. Maybe the womb medicine and the blood mysteries aren't part of that path. And so, because this goes all the way back to the Neolithic times, to the what we would call more the after, like around the Bronze Age, it started to, the patriarchal systems started to come in, and the religious systems started to really wipe out the feminine mysteries and the feminine consciousness in many ways. And even though it's not wiped out in our reality, in our consciousness, it's wiped out. So we live as if it doesn't exist. We live in a way that we're separated. And and yet these traces move through the earth-based traditions, and it moved through the wisdom traditions, and it moved through the Celtic and the Druid. And so many of these practices, foundations, we could still see the threads of these practices in these wisdom traditions. And there are some wisdom traditions that still venerate the mother, the great mother, as the divine oneness, where all of creation is born from, as the absolute. There are still some traditions, but I'm talking mostly about the dominant culture, the overall dominant culture. And so that's just a little bit of an idea of, giving an idea of feminine medicine and what that path is like. And so one of the things that I want to say again around voice medicine and the sacred drumming. Where's my drum? And the sacred drumming, as you all know, I drum a lot and you can't hear it. Let's see if you can hear it now. That this drum has been seen and connected to many, many of the mysteries of the temples that were still around. And a lot of this has been noted in Lane Redmond's book, When the Drummers Were Women, or When the Women Were Drummers. I always get that backwards. That's Lane Redmond, and she was an amazing drummer, frame drummer, and brought all of these kind of connected the dots with the women and how they used to be the original drummers, and how throughout history you can see them. You can see the different depictions of the women drummers and how the voice, the sound of the drumming was mystical, is a mystical experience, is a spiritual experience, and it's part of the feminine mysteries. And so using your voice, and I know for all the women, most of the women, probably about 90% of the women that I've worked with, myself included, that have felt, in our dominant culture, that our voice is not being heard, and that we shut down our voice. And this is part of the patriarchal culture, the result, we may say, of how we have survived in a patriarchal culture by shutting down our voice. And so the voice medicine pathway of feminine medicine is very, very powerful, because it's about activating our voice, activating and using the power that our voice has to heal. And like I've said before, in many of the spiritual traditions, we use chanting of the mystical traditions to transmute, to access various spiritual dimensions. And it's no different with feminine medicine. One of the ways that we do the training for healers is that we actually use the frame drum and tone into it. We're toning, but we're not toning necessarily by rote. We're kind of vocalizing organically. So it's coming through organically, the tones that feel right at the moment, because there's an intelligence in your being. So we're not doing it from our heads. We're actually allowing ourselves to listen and then be in that space and allow the sound to come through. And now there are sounds that we prescribe for each of the gates to open, to activate, to release, to dissolve some of the conditioning, some of the habitual patterns that we've created through our survival in patriarchy. But organically is where we want to go. We want to really sound organically and use the sound as we're tuning in, depending on what the intention is. If we're working with a group, if we're working with one person, if we're doing an offering to the mother, if we're using an invocation to just activate the space. And it's pretty powerful. Sound, and especially the sound of our voice, is the strongest medicine that I know to transform, to release the patterns. When we have patterns that we kind of catch ourselves like, oh, I did it again, and then we, go through this mental process of, okay, I'm not gonna do that again. I'm not going to, judge myself, or I'm not going to shame myself. And we think that by saying it, we're going to be able to change that pattern. But what happens inevitably is that unless you change the underlining wound, belief, trauma, this habitual pattern, this defense mechanism that's there, which might be to judge yourself, which might be to judge other, which might be to put yourself down. Unless we discharge the energy, if you may, the energy that's underneath that, that's usually some kind of wounding, some kind of trauma, some kind of, it could be an ancestral pattern. If we don't change what is underneath there, if we don't get to that root, if we don't look at it, if we don't allow it to come up to the surface, to be felt, to be experienced, to be acknowledged, right? Because a lot of why it's there to begin with is because it wasn't a safe space to be acknowledged. Like I was saying earlier about survival. In surviving, we've had to shut down many aspects of our true nature as women. Our intuition, our guiding, with the deep knowing, the gnosis that a lot of times we'll just know because we're able to connect to those realms. We've shut down our emotional realm because it's not okay to show emotions. We're judged as weak. It's not okay to show emotions, or vulnerable emotions, I should say, in the workplace or in the outer world in many ways. And so we've shut down and then we judge ourselves. And yet these are all really gifts that we carry and that are necessary. It's part of that unique expression of who we are in the world and what we bring to the table. Our emotions, and I can go into this at another time, but our emotions, especially the vulnerable emotions, when we're in touch with that, when we're in touch with how we feel vulnerably, it opens up our heart to compassion. And when our hearts are open, then we can feel another. And we can feel our another, and then we can make decisions and move and make action or take action from a place of a win-win with others. It's not about competition or feeling like we have to have power over, which is part of the dilemma that we're in our planet, which is there's so much disconnection from our true essence and from our emotional body, and of course the divine, that there's this need to have power over others, to feel empowered. But the true empowerment comes from, in many ways, our vulnerability, our connection with the divine, our truth of who we are. We don't have to make up stories about who we are based on how many things we control on the outer, because that's subject to change. That's not really who we are. That's not really our true value. And so our vulnerable emotions, and I say vulnerable because we're not talking necessarily about anger or rage, which we do see a lot of, or even the violence that's connected to some of that. We do see a lot of that out there. I'm talking about the vulnerable emotions, the ones that breaks our heart, that we could feel something other than the anger and the fire, right? That we could feel the pain. It softens us, and it also connects us to others. It connects us to that thread of compassion. And the compassion is the mother. The compassion is that divine realm. The compassion is the Great Mother that lives within us, but sometimes we're so shut down from it that we can't access it. And sometimes there's a lot of suffering that happens so that we can access it in a way. It's like our challenges break us down to be able to access. Like Rumi said, it's like the broken heart is where the light gets in. And so my interpretation is that as our hearts break, we can feel we land in something deeper, in that divine nature of our being, but also the divine nature that is sustaining us at all times. So, coming back full circle on this Samhain celebration, time to connect, time to look at what you'd like to let go of for the year. This is the end of the solar year. You know, where maybe in your heart, and this has been coming up a lot, where in your heart are you still holding pain and maybe even like grudges, like angst around things that have happened to you, that perhaps we can let in a little bit of love into those places to soften. Sometimes when we're hurt and we can't forgive because it's a sense of justice, and it's a sense of not wanting to let that go because, you know, people that cause harm. And we're seeing a lot of this around us at all times. There's so much of this happening in our planet right now. And so perhaps, is there a way, and maybe not with what's happening in the present moment because it's very intense, and I feel like we always need time to process it. We always need time to really feel our feelings around it and give it space. But maybe some of the past hurts that you've had, maybe some of the past hurts that maybe it's time. And when I say forgive, I mean forgiving, meaning letting in the light for yourself, knowing that allowing the love in for yourself is about healing yourself. It's about bringing the softness to that place in your heart that's been hurt. And it doesn't mean that we're okay with what has happened and that we're agreeing with it, or we're giving a pass to that situation or that person. It doesn't mean we have to pretend and have a relationship with that person. It just means that we can have a little bit of room so that we're not caught in that anger and that constriction, because that affects our body. That affects our biology. That affects our health. That affects our mental status. And that there's a way in which we can accept that took place, and that perhaps see the reasons why perhaps that person does not have the capacity to behave in a different way. It doesn't make it okay, but it does give you some space to not be so attached to it, so that you can receive the love and detach yourself from that person per se. It's kind of like cutting the cord in a way. Cutting the cord. And many times we have to forgive ourselves because we expect ourselves not to get into those situations or to try to prevent situations that hurt us. And the truth is that whenever we love in the world, whenever we love, whether it's something, a big love or small love or big relationship or small relationship, we're opening up to disappointment, to pain, to the inevitable that it might change, because things are always changing in our life and in ourselves and in our psyches, and things are always changing, transmuting, shifting. And so we have to be willing to accept for ourselves, forgive ourselves, come into the acceptance that we cannot avoid pain. But what we can do is we can return to the love. We don't have to stay hooked only in the pain and wishing it were different, and letting all of that anger fester within us. The anger has its place, and that's another video. The anger, there's a place for the anger. There's wisdom in the anger, absolutely. So I'm not saying to bypass any of your emotions, but sometimes when we've felt the anger, when we've felt all of what, because the anger, in many ways, the anger is what is telling us that something different needs to happen. The anger is like our cheerleader in a way. It's our protector. It's the one that's saying, red flag, the anger. And so the anger has wisdom. And this is not about bypassing, but perhaps making a list of the hurts that are still really prominent and in your heart at the end of this year now, the next few weeks in November, and deciding, I'm ready to bring in some love into this place that I was so hurt. And that takes also letting go of the shame, like I said, forgiving ourselves, letting go of the shame that you might, or the blame that you might be feeling around those situations, and letting go of, where you're accusing yourself still, like I should have known better, shouldn't have done that. That's all rooted in shame. And saying it happened. And, I couldn't foresee it, and that's okay. That's not a judgment of who you are. It's not a judgment of your value. It's just a fact. Things happen. You're not going to be able to control everything. And can we move with it? Can we return to the love? And also know that, that person is hurting. Not because you have to caretake, but because that's probably a truth. And so from that perspective, we can let go a little bit and bring it into our hearts and return to the love. And that's a beautiful intention to set for this, for the next few weeks, for this end of the solar year. And so here's wishing everyone a beautiful Samhain, many, many blessings, and may you receive everything that you are needing in your heart and in your soul. Many blessings.